Folks, I asked before, how many people here have read Pragmatic Programmer, own a copy, have been influenced by the book? Large number of you said yes. A number of you said no. So I think this is a good opportunity for those that have been influenced and are familiar to kind of maybe get to the backstory, maybe have some of the gaps filled in, hear from Andy directly. And then also for those of you not familiar, you'll understand why we feel like it's the most influential book maybe in the history of technology when it comes to programmers. And by the way, I would say this if Andy weren't standing right here. I would 100% say that. And that's merely based on feedback from our community over a lot of years. So Andy, you did a great job with the book. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thanks for agreeing to sign books and speak to people afterwards. And for those of you, by all means, I want you to stick around. We're going to do about 45 minutes of talk and then Q&A, and then we'll wrap things up, and then we'll go right outside. We'll have books sitting out. 50 of them will be available, hardcover. So they're very, very nice, but they'll be available on a first-come, first-served basis as well. Andy, thank you very, very much, my friend.
Thanks.
You bet.
He started it, but that's a hot mic. He started it, but I'm going to say thanks for coming out. I took one look at the temperature, was going to let my dog out, and the dog's like, I'm waiting until about March. We're not doing this. So yeah, I wouldn't have come tonight if I didn't, sort of have to. So thanks. My name is Andy Hunt. I have been programming commercially for money for 38 years. God, I shouldn't say that anymore. That sounds kind of horrible. And one of these days, I'm going to figure out how it actually works and how to do it right. I'm still working on that. So back in the mid-'90s, towards the end of the '90s, Dave Thomas and I wrote the Pragmatic Programmer book, which I'll tell you about in a second. And then in the early 2000s, like 2001, I guess it was, 2000, we wrote the Pickaxe, the Ruby programming book, which sort of introduced Ruby to the rest of the world. And then this little thing happened where I was one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto, trying to get people to think beyond the sort of rigid, linear, bureaucratic, plan-based approaches and do something more effective. A little while after that, Dave and I founded the Pragmatic Bookshelf Publishing Company, which is my quote-unquote day job these days. I run the publishing company, which is an interesting experience to sort of be at the, whatever metaphor you want to use, to be at the crossroads, to have your finger on the pulse of what people are excited about, what people are interested in, what people think are important enough to devote 9 to 12 months of their life writing a book about. That's some serious commitment. And you really only want to undertake something like that if you're really, really passionate about the subject matter. So that's an interesting data point to kind of see what's going on in the world. And there's a lot going on in the world, especially these days, as they say. So as Dave and I set out to do a 20th anniversary edition of the Pragmatic Programmer book, it was a bit of a time capsule to go back and see, well, what was the development world like back in the late 90s versus today? And an awful lot has changed, right? So think back to those days, say 98, 97, 98 or so. Dinosaurs roamed the earth, right, grazing under the window peacefully. And the dinosaurs were named Lycos, Alta Vista, right? Those were the search engine giants. Everyone was really worried about this huge monopoly called AOL that was, it was horrible. They carpet bombed you with CDs. It was devastating. And, it's a different, Google what? Google was not a verb. That wasn't a thing. It was a very different world, but a lot of things, as we notice going through the book, a lot of things haven't changed. Anything to deal with us as people, as individuals, as programmers, developers, we haven't changed in tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. The tech has changed, but it always does. So back in the 90s, what happened was we did not set out to write a book at all. let alone what did Todd call it, the most influential book? I know he's just being kind, but he's not wrong. And the funny thing is, that was really somewhat beginner's luck. I mean, we didn't sit down and go, we're going to write the most influential book of a generation. No. We were writing a white paper for our clients at the time. Because it seemed what would happen is you'd go into a new assignment, you'd meet with the client, and my God, the fact that they ever got anything out the door was nothing short of a miracle, right? Just disaster upon disaster. And they're like, yeah, well, we're trying. Okay. So that's fine, the first 1 or 2 or 3 or 5, and then you realize everyone you meet, they're doing the same things wrong. It's like, okay, well, we can help with this. How about think about it this way? Don't do it that way. Do it this way. Think about this context. So we thought it might save some time to write down these little observations, these little stories that we had, these little anecdotes, and just write it up as a white paper. We'd ship it on ahead to our clients before we got there, just to save some time. And unlike every software project ever, that project grew in scope beyond what we had sort of thought. And we were like, this could be a book. We've got enough stuff here. Maybe this is a book. And someone suggested, and I've honestly forgotten in the mists of time now who it was, but somebody suggested that, well, find a publisher. Go to your bookcase, see who has the books that you most respect and enjoy, and contact them. Okay. So we wrote Addison Wesley at the time because they had, the Gang of Four Patterns book and all the classics, the K&RC, all this stuff. And so we wrote, and they said, yeah, sounds good, sign here. Okay, dude, we know nothing about writing. We've never written a book before. I have no idea what we're doing. But we figured it out. The very first drafts of the book were written in T-ROF. Boy, there's some crickets back there. We ran up the limitations of that and then moved it into LaTeX, spelled latex, and did it that way. And so through the course of this, right, being programmers with a touch of not invented here syndrome, just a wee bit, most books were published then, and still today, they go through the sort of workflow where, as an author, you write the manuscript in something like, well, what now would be Microsoft Word, or even back then, maybe a FrameMaker or Quark or something, but not with any kind of formatting or anything. You just sort of write the text, then you give it to the publisher, and they make all the figures, and they retype the code listings that you printed out for them, and they send it off somewhere and type it in, and typeset it and print it. And we're looking at this going, that's stupid. Why would you do that? We've got this nifty thing. You can include files in the thing that you're building. So we built this whole little system that would produce a beautiful book. We could run the code examples live on the disk with unit tests and all the rest of that, and just suck the code right into the book with no transcription errors. So we went through and did all that, and they're like, okay, well, we'll typeset it for you. It's like, yeah, we're done. We're all set. We're good. We got that. Okay, fine. So they said, okay, well, indexing. The publisher said, we'll do the indexing for you. Okay, awesome. So they put us in touch with a professional indexer. Top men, I'll tell you. And the indexer's first question to us, I kid you not, what words do all y'all want indexed? So we did the indexing. And a few other things along the way. And by the end of the process, and it was a handsome-looking book. It sold well to our surprise. It cracked the top 10 on Amazon.com, not of programmer books, the top 10 of Amazon.com. And it would have been 2 positions higher, but there were 2 Harry Potter books on the list at the same time, which I think was extraordinarily unfair. Such is life. So we were as surprised as anyone. And some of that, I think, at the time was really just an accident of history. It was just the right thing at the right time, and it really struck a nerve. And people were like, oh, this is This is a different level of advice than whatever they taught in university and college, different than I got from these other professional books. And that was not without controversy. So some of the very early reviewers of the first draft, one gentleman in particular, who's still around, he's about 150, but he's still around, was incensed that we wrote such a fluffy, unscientific, unsubstantiated pile of drivel, and how dare we besmirch the profession by daring to suggest these things. All right, okay, whatever. Okay, dude, have a nice life. So it wasn't, it was not a slam dunk by any means. We were taking quite a risk because this wasn't the sort of typical boring, dry, you've read those textbooks, right? The ones where you're halfway through reading and you just want to kind of gnaw your arm off to get out of it and not finish it. We had jokes. There were some funny bits in there. We made fun of UML diagrams. We had some stick figures with mommy and me for use cases. We poked fun at things that deserved it. And it was a good time. And, mercifully, it was well received, and it opened up a lot of people's eyes to things that had been done but hadn't been described well. So almost this kind of like intellectual dark matter that kind of permeates between us. And if you've worked with someone, alongside someone in some kind of a mentorship capacity, an apprenticeship kind of deal, you learn these little tricks of the trade, these ways of doing things, these approaches, but they're not taught in undergrad courses to this day. They're not usually taught in any formal job training. It's just that stuff that's out there. So Dave and I tried very hard to put names to some of these things, and thus the DRY principle came about. We didn't invent that per se. I mean, it was an idea. It was a thing that was out there, but it didn't have a name. It wasn't qualified. It wasn't quantified in any way. So we made up a definition and gave it a name, and now it is part of the vocabulary. It's, we hear people mentioning it in conference talks, in TED Talks, in books, in courses, and half the time they don't even know where it came from. It's like, okay, well, that was us. That was it. My son just graduated this last semester from NC State, just down the road, in computer science. And he called me up all excited one afternoon because in their some freshman class, there I was up on the screen. Right? That's got to be kind of cool. It's like, hey, I know that guy. So yeah, that I guess that counts as wow. Okay, that got you some virality. So where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so all these little bits and pieces we sort of put names to. The idea that if you explain your code to somebody, they just sit there and nod, and as you're describing it, you're like, oh crap, I realized what I did. Rubber ducking. You describe it to the duck. That came from the book. And on and on and on. The ideas of tracer bullets and, well, I mean, it's all in the book. If you've read it, you've seen them all. And if not, you're going to read it soon because you're going to get a copy tonight. So then you'll know. And so 20 years came by, and it's like, all right, what do we need to change? What do we need to update given that this is not the world of the late 90s with dial-up modems and AOL and Lycos and all the rest of these things. This is a very different world. So we had to add new material. We kind of called out the need for DevOps back then. Of course, it wasn't called that. So we had to revise some of that. We strongly advised you had to have a build machine, except back then it was a PC sitting in the corner. Now it's a pipeline in the cloud. Same idea, different implementation, that's fine. But that little change, even something as simple as that opens up a whole new world of possibilities of other things you can do that are interesting. And so there was a fair bit of that, okay, well, we have matured as an industry. Doesn't feel it a lot of the times, but we have gained some ground. We have learned how to do some things better. I remember back in probably the early aughts. I was in a large conference room, maybe 1,000 people or so, and we asked for a show of hands of who did not use version control of any sort. And a bunch of folks in the back, granted they were in the back, kind of sheepishly raised their hands. I did have someone tell me once, with a straight face, I said, "What are you all using for version control?" They said, "Microsoft Outlook." I'm sorry, I said version control. Yeah, we use Outlook. How? Oh, at the end of the day, we all mail each other all the source code, so there's a copy on the server. I cannot make this stuff up. It's just, that's right up there with my current favorite, where, again, I'm not making this up. I had someone tell me to my face, of course our organization is agile. We use Jira. Wow. So we have a ways to go still, clearly. But we have made some progress. We had to add material to the book for things that weren't really a consideration back in the day. Back at some wonderful point in time, you could vi main.c and run a.out, and everything was just right there, and it was beautiful. And now you can't do that, right? Hello World and React brings in, what is it, 1,000, 10,000 NPM modules? I'm sorry, remote viruses from all over the web. Yeah, that's going to come back to bite us. Well, and you remember what? LeftPad, right? You remember the LeftPad disaster about, what was that, 2 years ago-ish? Where the maintainer pulled a simple 5-line module and half the web broke because everyone was building with live dependencies, and suddenly this thing in the repo wasn't there anymore, and the whole thing croaked. This is why we can't have nice things. So we had to, that's a long way of saying, we had to add a little chapter on just thinking about basic security, because that really wasn't a consideration back in the day, and now that has to be almost one of the first considerations. Security, privacy, how can this be weaponized? Could this thing you're writing be used against people? Could it be used against you? That wasn't a concern not that long ago, and now that's maybe the chief concern. What are we doing with this data, this personally identifiable information? There's laws about that. If GDPR hasn't bit you yet, California just did. And they won't be the last, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. So, those kinds of societal impacts are moving in, and as Todd said in the beginning, software is everywhere. It's not like software is going to eat the world. That ship sailed. It's done. There's a wonderful Twitter account that this is being taped and shown, so I can't say the actual name of the account because it contains profanity. But it talks about the Internet of Things, and points out these hilarious bits where you can't go. This guy had to put a T-shirt over his lamp because he couldn't turn the lamp off because the lamp's server was down. And these kinds of things. The oven that spontaneously turned itself on and burned the house down, and all this great stuff. And we're right in there. That's us. We are right in there with that. So, what may have just been a core dump or a crash or a blue screen of death, that starts getting a lot more the death part. And that's on us. We have to be a little bit more conscious about these things. So we tried to pack all these changes to the world, all these new things that are happening today, but still keep the flavor of the original Pragmatic Programmer book, still keep as many of the jokes as we could get away with, and some of them we couldn't. Some of them were kind of stupid the first time around, to be honest, so we ditched those. The interesting thing was, when Dave and I first wrote the book, it took a little over maybe 2 man-years of effort. We stopped taking clients, and we focused exclusively on writing for over a solid year. It was probably like 14 months. And we would literally argue over exact words. So first of all, Dave's from England. He's British, so he talks funny. And what's worse is he lives in Texas, so y'all really talk funny with a British accent. So there were some very hilarious misunderstandings where he would use the British form of an expression, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? That just did not translate. But we were very careful and very precise where we could be to try to get the right idea across. Because it's so easy to just mistakenly use the wrong word and somebody misunderstands. Especially if you're talking about code, you talk about some variable that's called X. No, it's named X. Use the word called, now you're executing it, and people start getting it right. So these very simple things, but suddenly it can get quite confusing if you're sloppy about it. So we were very, very careful and spent an inordinate amount of time really crafting and distilling and honing the book, trying to get it to what we thought at the time were sort of the most important things that weren't being discussed, that weren't out in the open, that weren't widely known. And apparently that worked, and that paid off. So this time came around to redo it for the 20th anniversary. We're like, oh boy, we're going to have wildly different ideas about what needs to change. I mean, oh, how are we going to do this? So we each went off and separately made a list of, all right, here are the biggest things that I think have changed in the industry. Here are the things I think we need to address. Here's the tips I think we need to ditch because they're not relevant anymore, or we've changed our position on it, or whatever it might be. And Dave made the same list for himself. And then we went and checked them against each other, and 80% of the list was identical, in the same order even. It's like, get that camera on me or something? I took that as a really good sign, because that meant that despite our differences of opinions and different experiences, that was pretty common. We recognized, all right, these are the important things. So that's what we focused on, and the results, it sounds self-serving, because it is, but it really is a fun read. I enjoyed going back, even proofreading it for the bazillionth time. You can never proofread it enough, right? You can look at something 100 times in a row, and as soon as the ink hits paper, you find the two thes in the row, or whatever it might be. But we did that. We started working on that last spring. We delivered it to the printer July 1st, I think it was. And funny thing, our publishing company, Pragmatic Bookshelf, on the web at pragprog.com, our authors, when they finish writing, it takes 8 to 10 weeks of copy edit and layout and indexing and them proofing it and these sorts of processes, and then bang, it's finished and it's ready for production. And the print takes days. We have it up in ebook that same day. So it's a moderately fast process. My wife wrote a textbook on nursing informatics. When she delivered the manuscript to Springer, it was 12 months before they had it in print. When we delivered our manuscript in July, we got hardcovers in September, end of September, early October. So, we have claimed that we have an agile publishing company, and if you actually look at stats like that, you actually look at numbers, we really do. We move stuff right along, we get it out, it's smooth, it's streamlined. Other older, more established companies, not so much. They've got a lot more process in place, a lot more bureaucracy, different market forces maybe, different considerations. But, with something like a tech book, right, you can't let it sit around for a year, right? The world has moved by then. You're on Rails 8 by now, or whatever it might be. So that's kind of the short history of the book and how it came about and what brings me here tonight.